The diner was almost empty that morning. The sun had barely risen, and the soft light coming through the window made everything look tired and slow, just like the man sitting alone in the corner booth. Outside, cars passed now and then, but inside, it was quiet except for the low hum of the coffee machine. He sat with his shoulders slightly hunched, wearing a dark jacket that had seen better days. Once, clothes like this would have been tailored, crisp, and expensive. Now they were clean but worn, like they belonged to someone who stopped caring about appearance a long time ago. On the table in front of him were a thin folder of papers, a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and a pen resting between his fingers. The papers were official, heavy, even though they were only a few pages. Bankruptcy documents. The final step in admitting defeat. He stared at them as if they might change if he looked long enough. His name sat neatly printed on every page, black ink against white paper. Years of effort, risk, sleepless nights, and bold promises had all been reduced to these pages. He had built something from almost nothing once. Back then, he believed effort always paid off. He believed that if you were smart, careful, and worked harder than others, things would work out. Now, those beliefs felt childish. He picked up the pen, then put it down again. His hand shook just a little. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but he noticed. He remembered signing papers in the past contracts that brought new opportunities, handshakes that meant expansion, smiles from people who said they believed in him. Signing those papers had always felt exciting. This felt like digging his own grave. The waitress noticed him the moment she stepped onto the floor. She had been working the morning shift long enough to recognize patterns. Early mornings usually brought regular retired folks, delivery drivers, construction workers, grabbing coffee before a long day. This man didn't fit any of those groups. He hadn't touched his food. He had ordered the cheapest breakfast on the menu, barely looking up while doing so. No phone in his hand. No conversation. Just those papers spread out carefully, like they mattered more than anything else in the room. She poured fresh coffee into a pot and walked toward his booth. From the side, she could see his face more clearly now. There were deep lines around his eyes, not from age alone, but from stress. The kind that lives with a person day and night. His eyes were fixed on one page as if it had personally betrayed him. She didn't interrupt right away. She placed the coffee down gently and waited. "Refill," she said softly, more to announce her presence than to ask permission. He nodded without looking up. "Thanks." His voice was dry, rough, like he hadn't spoken much recently. She poured the coffee, noticing again how untouched everything was. Habit made her smile politely. "You want me to warm up the food?" "It's been sitting a bit." He finally looked up at her. The smile he tried to give didn't quite work. "No, I'm fine." She hesitated, then stepped back, but something about him stayed in her mind. Most people with bad days tried to hide it. This man wasn't hiding at all. He looked like someone who had accepted his loss. She returned to the counter, but her eyes kept drifting back to his booth. He thought about the road that brought him here. The first mistake was trusting someone he shouldn't have. Then another small compromise. Then one more. Each bad decision felt manageable at the time. Each one had a reason. But together, they formed a mess he couldn't escape. Lawyers had stopped sugarcoating things. Friends had gone quiet. People who once answered his calls right away now let them ring. He didn't blame them. Failure made people uncomfortable. This morning was supposed to be simple. Sign the papers. Accept the loss. Start over somehow, if that was even possible at his age. He chose the diner because it felt anonymous. No one here knew him. No one cared, except somehow. One person had noticed. The waitress wiped the counter and moved closer again, pretending to tidy up nearby tables. She wasn't sure why she felt drawn to him. Maybe it was his silence. Maybe it was the way he looked at those papers like they were a verdict. "Everything okay?" she asked carefully. Not the cheerful version people expect, but a genuine question. He almost said yes. The word was already on his lips. Years of habit told him not to burden strangers, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she asked, without rushing. Or maybe he was just too tired to lie. "Not really," he said. She nodded, as if that answer made sense. Yeah, mornings can be rough. He let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. This one's worse than most. She glanced at the papers, only briefly, not enough to feel nosy. Paperwork problems? Life problems, he said quietly. She considered her next words carefully. Well, she said, if you need more coffee, I've got plenty of that. Can't promise it'll fix anything, though. That earned a real smile. Small, but real. I'll take the coffee. She refilled his cup again, then paused. Take your time, she added. No rush here. She walked away, but the exchange lingered with him. It felt strange to be treated like a person again instead of a problem to be solved. He looked back down at the papers. One page caught his eye this time, though he had read it dozens of times already. He traced a line of text with his finger, wondering how everything had gone wrong so quickly. He had always respected numbers. They were honest. Or so he thought. The pen felt heavy in his hand again. At the counter, the waitress watched him from the corner of her eye. She didn't know what those papers said, but she knew the look of someone standing at the edge of something final. She had grown up around people who carried worry like a second skin. She recognized it instantly. A few minutes passed. He didn't sign. Instead, he closed the folder slowly and rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet, though no tears fell. He took a deep breath, then another, like he was preparing for a difficult conversation. She took that as her sign and walked back over. You sure you don't want something else? She asked. On the house. Toast, maybe. He shook his head. I don't have much of an appetite. She leaned slightly against the booth, keeping her voice low. Those papers look important? They are. Dove Road important? He studied her face, surprised by the honesty of the question. There was no pity in her eyes. Just curiosity and concern. Yes, he said after a moment. That's a good way to describe it. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't rush him. She simply nodded. That's heavy. He swallowed hard. Yeah. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence felt different now, less lonely. I used to think, he said suddenly, that if you did everything right, you couldn't fail like this. She tilted her head slightly. And now? Now I know that being careful doesn't protect you from everything. She thought about that, then said sometimes it just means you fall differently. He looked at her, surprised. That's an interesting way to put it. She shrugged lightly. I've seen a few falls. He let out a slow breath and looked at the papers again. I'm supposed to sign these this morning. She glanced at the pen in his hand. Supposed to, she repeated. He met her eyes. You ever get that feeling like something's wrong, but you can't tell what? All the time, she said. He nodded, as if that answer helped more than advice ever could. That's how this feels. She didn't know why, but a strange sense of urgency crept into her chest. Like this moment mattered more than either of them realized. Well, she said carefully, maybe don't rush it. If it's important, it'll still be important in an hour. He studied her for a long moment, then slowly placed the pen on the table. The morning light grew brighter as time passed. Outside, the world kept moving, unaware that one small diner held a man standing on the edge of losing everything. And for the first time that day, he didn't feel completely alone. He leaned back in the booth, papers still untouched, unaware that this quiet moment, this delay, this conversation was already changing the path ahead. The pen stayed on the table as the minutes passed. He watched the steam rise from his coffee, thin and restless, then disappear into the air. His thoughts were doing the same thing, rising, circling, going nowhere. He had delayed decisions before, but this felt different. This pause felt heavy, like standing in front of a closed door you aren't sure you're ready to open. The waitress stayed nearby, not hovering, just close enough to notice if he needed something. She wiped the counter again, slower this time, pretending to be busy, while keeping him in her peripheral vision. Something in her told her not to walk away completely. After a while, he cleared his throat. You ever notice how quiet places like this are in the morning? She turned, a little surprised. Yeah, she said. It's like the world hasn't decided what kind of day it's going to be yet. He nodded to himself. Feels that way. She walked back to his booth and refilled his cup even though it was still half full. "You want to talk about it?" she asked. Not softly this time. Not carefully either. Just plainly. He looked at her, then at the papers again. "I don't even know where I'd start." "Start anywhere," she said. "You don't have to make it sound good." He gave a slow, tired smile. "That's a relief." He tapped the folder with one finger. "This morning was supposed to be the end of something I spent most of my life building." She pulled out the unused seat across from him and sat down, only halfway, like she might stand at any moment. "That's big," she said. "I didn't plan to lose it," he went on. "No one ever does. It happened slowly, then all at once. A bad deal, a bad partner, a few choices made out of fear instead of sense." She listened without interrupting, her eyes steady. That encouraged him more than words ever could. "I kept telling myself I could fix it," he said. "That if I worked harder, stayed up later, pushed through, I could pull things back." He let out a short breath. "Turns out effort doesn't fix everything," she said. "Sometimes it just keeps you afloat long enough to realize how deep you are." That made him pause. He studied her again, as if trying to place where this kind of thinking came from. "You've seen that before," she said simply. He hesitated, then added, "Everyone I talk to lately only sees the numbers. The losses. The deadlines." She looked down at the folder briefly. "Numbers matter," she said, "but they're not the whole story." He laughed quietly. "That's funny. That's almost what you joked about earlier." She smiled a little. "Guess it stuck." There was a small pause. Then she reached toward the papers, stopping just short of touching them. "Can I ask what part feels wrong?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You said it feels wrong," she replied. "Not scary. Not painful. Wrong." He leaned back, surprised by how accurately she had named it. "I keep feeling like I'm missing something. Like I'm being rushed into a decision that doesn't fully add up." She nodded slowly. "That happens a lot when people are tired." "Tired doesn't begin to cover it," he said. She leaned forward slightly. "Then walk me through it." "Not all of it. Just the part that keeps looping in your head." He hesitated. Letting a stranger into this felt risky, almost embarrassing. But something about the quiet diner, the lack of judgment, made it easier. "There's a deadline," he said. "Today, if I don't sign, things get more complicated. More calls. More pressure. And if you do sign," he swallowed, "it's over. Everything." She rested her elbows lightly on the table. "So either way today matters." "Yes," she studied the folder again. "Who told you today was the only option?" He opened his mouth, then stopped. "That's what I was advised." "Advised by someone who benefits from speed?" she asked, gently. He stiffened, then relaxed. "I don't know. Maybe." She shrugged slightly. "I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying pressure doesn't always mean truth." That sentence landed harder than he expected. Pressure doesn't always mean truth. He felt something loosen inside his chest. He flipped the folder open again and slid one page out. "This section," he said. "It talks about repayment, timelines, interest. I've read it 100 times, but it still feels twisted." She glanced at the page. She didn't read every word. She wasn't trying to act like an expert. Instead, she scanned it the way someone looks for patterns. "Who explained this to you?" she asked. "Several people," he answered. "All differently." She nodded. "That's usually a sign it's not as simple as they make it sound." He looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" "Because simple things are explained the same way by everyone," she said. "When explanations change, it's often because something doesn't fully make sense." He sat back again, stunned by how reasonable that sounded. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Can I tell you something?" He nodded. "I grew up watching adults panic over money," she said. "They signed things they didn't understand just to make the stress stop. Sometimes the thing they feared didn't happen. Sometimes something worse did." He listened carefully. "The biggest mistakes I saw," she continued, "weren't made because people were stupid. They were made because people were exhausted." That hit too close to home. He rubbed his temples. So what are you saying? I'm saying, she replied, before you sign anything that ends a chapter of your life, make sure you're not signing just to end the noise. He looked down at the pen again. For the first time, he didn't feel drawn to it. I don't even know what other option I have, he said. She met his eyes. Options don't disappear just because someone hasn't mentioned them. They sat in silence again. Outside, a bus rumbled past. Somewhere in the kitchen, a plate clattered. Finally, he said, You know, no one I've spoken to has taken this long to listen. She smiled lightly. I don't charge by the hour. That made him laugh, a real laugh this time. The kind that surprised him as much as it did her. I came in here thinking today was already decided, he said quietly. Now I'm not so sure. She stood up slowly, pushing the chair back. You don't have to decide right this second. He watched her return to the counter, feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief that the moment was no longer rushing toward him. Fear that slowing down meant facing truths he had been avoiding. He reopened the folder again, this time with a different mindset. Not as a defeated man preparing to surrender, but as someone trying to understand. Across the room, the waitress glanced over and caught his eye. She gave a small nod, as if to say, Take your time. He nodded back. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel sealed shut. It felt uncertain, and somehow, that felt like progress. The diner grew a little busier as the morning moved forward. A few new customers came in, coats shrugged off, chairs scraping softly against the floor. The noise didn't bother him. In fact, it grounded him. Life was still happening around him, even if his own felt frozen. He stayed focused on the papers, but he wasn't reading them the same way anymore. Before, his eyes rushed through the lines, looking for an end. Now he slowed down, almost forcing himself to understand each sentence. The waitress moved between tables, taking orders, clearing plates. Every now and then, their eyes met. She didn't smile every time. She didn't interrupt. She just stayed present, and that was enough. He reached a section that had always confused him. Not because it was hard to read, but because it didn't feel settled. The language was vague. Times listed, but not clearly defined. Words like may, subject to, and adjusted if necessary. His chest tightened again. When she passed by, he raised a hand slightly. She came over. There's something here I can't make sense of, he said, tapping the page. She leaned in, careful not to crowd him. What part? This section about delaying payments, he said. They explained it as a dead end. Said it only drags things out and makes it worse. And you believed him? She asked, not accusing, just curious. At the time, yes. She scanned the page. But now? Now, it feels unfinished, he admitted. Like there's more beneath the surface. She followed the lines with her finger, slow and thoughtful. What happens if you don't sign today? He sighed. More interest. More fees? More calls? And what happens if you do? Everything gets locked in. She leaned back slightly. Locked in sounds permanent. It is. She nodded once. Delays usually get framed as weakness, but sometimes delay is just time. He looked at her sharply. Time for what? To breathe, she said. To notice details people skip when they want things over with. That settled into him slowly. He pointed to a small paragraph. This clause, he said. They told me it doesn't change anything. She read it again. Her brow furrowed. It says adjustments depend on revenue flow, not total debt. He blinked. That's not how it was explained. How was it explained? She asked, like everything was already decided. Like this was just paperwork confirming it. She looked down at the page again. Paperwork usually follows decisions. But sometimes it also hides choices. He leaned forward, heart beating faster now. Are you saying there's still room to move? I'm saying, she replied carefully, that if revenue keeps coming in, even small amounts, this clause could matter. It's not nothing. He stared at the words again. For the first time, they looked different. Not friendly, not hopeful, but not final either. I can't believe this, he murmured. No one pointed this out. She shrugged. People don't look too closely when they think they already know the ending. That sentence echoed inside him. He thought back to meetings where everyone spoke in rushed tones. To the subtle way deadlines were used like weapons. To his own tired nodding, just wanting it to be done. What if I'm wrong? He asked. What if I delay and make things worse? She met his eyes. What if you don't delay and lock yourself into something you don't fully understand? They sat quietly again. The choice hovered between them. I didn't expect to be having this conversation here, he said finally. Looking around the diner, life doesn't wait for perfect settings, she replied. He smiled faintly. That's for sure. He glanced at his phone, then pushed it aside without checking it. If I take a pause, he said, everything gets louder. More pressure. More fear. Fear loves speed, she said. It hates questions. He let out a slow breath. You're good at this. She shook her head. I'm just not afraid of sitting with uncomfortable things, that made him think. He traced the margin of the page again. This clause gives room, he said. Not much, but enough to review. Enough to renegotiate. She gave a small nod. Enough to keep the door open. The thought sent a strange warmth through his chest. What if my advisors get upset? He asked. She smiled slightly. If asking questions upsets them, maybe that tells you something too. He laughed under his breath. You know, you're the only one who's made any of this feel manageable. Her expression softened. Most situations get smaller when someone actually looks at them. He sat back and closed the folder. Not with defeat this time, but with intention. I'm not signing today, he said quietly. She didn't celebrate. She didn't cheer. She just said, okay. That simple word felt powerful. He stood up slowly, joints stiff, mind buzzing. The weight on his shoulders hadn't vanished, but it had shifted at the counter. She rang up another customer, then leaned back toward him. You'll probably feel unsure later, she said. That doesn't mean you did the wrong thing, he nodded. Uncertainty feels different than hopelessness. Exactly. He gathered his papers and placed them neatly into the folder. The pen stayed behind on the table. As he walked toward the door, he paused. I don't even know how to thank you, he said. She tilted her head. Just don't rush a decision that matters. He nodded again and stepped outside. The air felt cooler, sharper. He took a deep breath, feeling it fill his lungs all the way down behind him. Inside the diner, life continued as usual. But for him, something had shifted. Not certainty, not success, just a crack in the wall he thought was solid. And sometimes, that's all it takes. He didn't go far after leaving the diner. He walked a few blocks, then stopped at a small public bench near a quiet street. The folder rested on his lap. Cars passed. People hurried by with their own worries. None of them knew what he was carrying in his hands. His phone began to buzz not long after. One missed call. Then another. He didn't answer. He knew who it was. He knew what they would say. Deadlines, consequences, serious tones meant to pull him back into line. For once, he didn't react. He opened the folder again and read the page the waitress had pointed out. Slowly, word by word, he underlined a sentence with his finger, then another. The more he looked, the clearer it became that the situation wasn't as final as it had been made to sound. Uncomfortable. Yes, risky definitely, but not finished. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered, Where are you? A voice asked on the other end. Calm, but sharp underneath. Outside, he said. You were supposed to sign this morning. I know. Pause. Did something happen? He thought about the diner, the quiet booth, the simple questions. I'm reviewing a clause I was told didn't matter. Another pause. Longer this time. We already went over that. Not thoroughly enough, he replied. The voice tightened. Dragging this out won't help. I'm not dragging, he said. I'm deciding. The call ended shortly after, not warmly. He stared at his phone for a moment, then slid it into his pocket. His hands were steady now. That surprised him. He spent the rest of the morning doing something he hadn't done in months. He thought clearly, he made notes. Asked himself honest questions. Questions that had nothing to do with shame and everything to do with reality. He looked at smaller income streams he still had. Not impressive ones. Not life-saving ones. But consistent. By afternoon, he had made calls of his own. He requested second opinions. Not favors. Just clarity. Some people brushed him off. Others did. Each conversation peeled back another layer of fear. It wasn't gone, but it was less controlling. The waitress's words stayed with him the entire time. Fear loves speed. It hates questions. He slept poorly that night, but woke up strangely focused. The next day was harder. Pressure arrived in the form of emails. Official language. Heavy warnings. Phrases designed to make slowing down feel irresponsible. He felt the old panic rise. Then he remembered the pen left on the table. That image steadied him. He returned to the diner the following morning. Not because he needed advice, but because it felt grounding, familiar, safe in a quiet way. She was there again. Apron tied, hair pulled back, already moving between tables. She noticed him immediately. "You came back," she said. Surprised, but pleased. "Yeah," he replied. "Figured I owed you an update." She set down a cup of coffee without asking. "Good or stressful?" "Both." He told her what happened after he left. The calls. The pushback. The questions he was finally asking. She listened, nodding occasionally. "Sounds like you're standing your ground," she said. "I don't know if it'll work," he admitted. She shrugged lightly. Trying doesn't guarantee success, but rushing pretty much guarantees regret. He smiled at that. "I forgot what it feels like to pause," he said. "I've been reacting for so long, I thought that was the same as moving forward." "It isn't," she replied. "Reaction is just movement without direction." That sentence stuck. As the days passed, the situation grew tense. Advisors pushed. Deadlines shifted. Some relationships cooled when he refused to be rushed. That hurt more than he expected, but something else happened. Others stepped up. One specialist pointed out the same clause without being prompted. Another mentioned a restructuring path that hadn't been discussed before. Not perfect, not painless, but real. The risk was still there. Failure was still possible, but bankruptcy was no longer the only ending anyone could see. Late one evening, sitting alone with his notes spread across the table, he felt a strange emotion rise up. Pride, not in winning, not in outcomes. In not giving up without understanding, he realized how close he had come to signing simply to stop the pressure, to end the shame, to be done, and how different things would have been the next morning. He sent an email asking for time backed by clear reasoning, not fear. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't defensive. It was firm. The response wasn't immediate, but when it came, it acknowledged the points he raised. That changed everything. When he went back to the diner later that week, the waitress looked tired. Busy shift. He waited until she had a moment. "They agreed to review," he said. She studied his face. "That's good." "It is," he replied. "No guarantees yet." She smiled. "There never are." He hesitated, then added, "You know, if you hadn't asked me those questions," she raised a hand gently, "you still would have had to choose." "Yeah," he said, "but I wouldn't have paused." She nodded. Sometimes the pause is the point. He left that day feeling lighter than he had in a long time. Nothing was finished, but he was no longer boxed in by a single ending. The story wasn't over. It was finally being written with open eyes. That answer didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, spread over several days. Through emails that were carefully worded and phone calls that sounded less urgent than before. No one used the word saved. No one promised anything. But the tone had changed. He noticed that first. People stopped telling him what he had to do and started asking what he wanted to do. That felt new. He sat at his kitchen table one morning with the folder open in front of him again. This time, it didn't make his chest tighten. He had notes in the margins now. Questions answered. Options listed. It wasn't clean or simple, but it was honest. There would be sacrifice ahead. Smaller living. Fewer comforts. Long months of uncertainty. But there would also be possibility. He thought back to the moment the pen had been in his hand. How close he had come to signing without understanding. How fast everything could have ended. He closed the folder and leaned back. Later that day, his phone rang. He answered without hesitation. "They're approving the restructure." The voice on the other end said, "It's conditional, tight, but it keeps the business alive." Closed his eyes. Alive, not untouched. Not easy, but alive. "Thank you," he said quietly after the call ended. He sat there for a long time, letting the weight of it settle. Relief came first, warm and fast. Then something else followed. Gratitude, not the loud kind. The quiet kind that sinks deep. He went to the diner that evening. The place looked the same as always. Same booths, same hum of conversation, same smell of coffee. But he walked in differently. She was working the counter, moving quickly, focused. When she looked up and saw him, her expression shifted just a little. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," he replied. She poured coffee and slid it across. "So, they approved a plan," he said. "It's not easy, but it works." She smiled. Not wide, not dramatic. "Just real, that's good." He nodded. "I thought you should know. You changed the direction of a lot more than you realized." She shook her head gently. "You did the work." "Still," he said, "you slowed me down when I needed it most." She leaned on the counter. "Everyone needs that at least once." He looked around the diner, then back at her. "You ever think about using that clarity somewhere else?" She raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job?" He smiled. "No, I'm asking if you know how rare it is to sit with someone else's panic without trying to control it." She thought about that. "I think most people are capable of more than they're given credit for." He paid for his coffee and stood to leave, then paused. "I almost didn't walk back in here," he admitted. "I know," she said. "Most people don't." Outside, the air felt lighter again. Weeks passed. Life didn't magically improve overnight. Some days were hard. Harder than before, in different ways. He spent more time planning, more time listening, and less time pretending he had all the answers. That felt like growth. One afternoon, while organizing papers, he found the pen he had left behind. The same one he nearly used to end everything. He held it for a moment, then placed it in a drawer. Not as a reminder of fear, but as proof that hesitation can be wisdom. He went back to the diner. Occasionally, never announced. Never expecting anything special, just a familiar place where something important had shifted. They spoke when time allowed. About work. About people. About how life rarely turns out the way you expect. Nothing dramatic, just human. One morning, sitting alone again with a cup of coffee, he watched another man at a nearby table staring at his phone, shoulders tight. Jaw clenched. The look was familiar when the waitress passed by. He caught her eye and nodded toward the man. She followed his glance and sighed softly. "Looks like someone could use a pause," she said. He smiled. Maybe that was how things continued. Not with big gestures or speeches, but with small moments where one person helps another slow down just enough to choose better. He finished his coffee and stood up at the door. He looked back once more. At the counter? At the booth where everything nearly ended, and where, quietly, it didn't. He stepped outside into a future that wasn't certain, but was his, and that was enough. Life did not slow down just because one major decision had gone well. If anything, it demanded more from him now. The relief he felt after avoiding bankruptcy faded into something more practical. Responsibility. Every choice mattered again, but this time in a different way. Each morning started earlier than before. He reviewed accounts while drinking plain coffee at the kitchen table. No rushing. No pretending numbers meant something they didn't. He kept things simple, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable. But he stayed with them. Some days were good. Some days were heavy. The business did not bounce back fast. That illusion disappeared quickly. What remained was steady effort and small wins that only mattered when stacked together: a payment made on time, an agreement honored, a client who stayed. He learned to accept smaller progress without be embarrassed by it. That was new. People treated him differently now. Not better, clearer. Some who were loud before became distant. Others, quieter ones, stepped closer. He noticed who listened and who only spoke when things were easy. He didn't resent anyone for it. He was too busy rebuilding. The diner stayed part of his routine. He didn't go every day, and when he did, he didn't expect conversation. Sometimes they nodded. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes she was too busy, and that was fine. One morning, the place was crowded. Voices overlapped. Plates clinked. He took his usual booth and read through notes while waiting for coffee. A young man sat 2 tables over, arguing quietly on his phone. His words were sharp, defensive, short. "I told you I'd handle it," the young man said. "I just need more time." The words echoed something familiar. When the call ended, the young man stared at the table, jaw tight, eyes unfocused. The waitress approached him carefully, just as she once had with him coffee. She asked, the young man nodded. He watched it happen, without interrupting. Later, she passed his table. He said softly, "You do this a lot." She tilted her head. "Do what?" "Give people space when they need it most." She smiled slightly. Everyone notices stress. Not everyone respects it. It stayed with him. As weeks turned into months, he realized something unexpected. Saving the business had not returned him to who he was before. It changed him. He stopped glorifying endless work. He stopped pretending control was strength. He listened more and spoke less. He asked better questions. When pressure came, he slowed down instead of speeding up. That didn't make life easier, but it made it clearer. One afternoon, reviewing long-term plans, he noticed how close he came to repeating old mistakes. Bigger risk. Faster growth. The same promises are worded. He closed the document. Not now. The thought surprised him. Past him would have chased the opportunity out of fear of missing something. Now he felt grounded enough to wait. That alone felt like a win. He returned to the diner late one evening, near closing time. The place was quiet again, just like that first morning. The same booth was free. She noticed him and smiled. "Feels familiar, doesn't it?" she said. "Yeah," he replied. "Different reason this time." "What brings you in so late?" "Thinking," he said. She nodded. "That's usually why." He hesitated, then spoke. "You know, if I had signed that day, none of this would exist now. The stress, yes, but also the learning." She leaned against the counter. "Sometimes the lesson is the gift, even when it hurts. Especially then." Silence filled the diner again. Later, after paying, he lingered at the door. "You ever wonder how many lives shift quietly without anyone noticing?" he asked. She smiled. "All the time."
Outside, streetlights hummed.
The city looked the same, but he didn't. Months passed, the business stabilized. Not impressive, not newsworthy, just stable. That was enough. One morning, while signing a contract that actually felt right, he paused. Not from fear, but from awareness. He read each page carefully. He signed only after everything made sense. That felt like progress no one else could see. He framed the first balanced report and hung it in his office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Things can improve without returning to old versions of yourself. The diner continued its quiet role in his life, a place where nothing special happened that made all the difference. One afternoon, the waitress handed him his receipt and said, "You seem steady." He looked up. "I feel steadier." "That counts," she said. Later that week, while organizing paperwork, he found the bankruptcy folder again. He considered throwing it away instead. He placed it on a shelf, not to dwell on it, but to remember what rushing costs. On a quiet Sunday morning, he took a walk without thinking about money. That alone felt like freedom. The sun was warm, the sidewalk familiar. His phone stayed in his pocket, he realized. Then that fate hadn't changed because of a single conversation. It changed because he finally listened. The waitress didn't rescue him. She reminded him of something he already had: time and the courage to use it. As he walked on, he understood that the story wasn't about avoiding its bankruptcy. It was about learning when not to sign your life away. Quietly, carefully, one choice at a time. Stability, he learned, was not the same as peace. The bills were paid. The panic had faded. But something restless lived underneath all of it, like a quiet question that hadn't yet found words. The business was running smoothly enough, not growing fast, not shrinking either. Employees showed up on time. Clients were steady. On paper, things looked fine. Yet some mornings, he woke up with the same tight feeling he had back in the diner months ago. Not fear exactly, more like awareness. Something was changing. He couldn't say when it started. Maybe it had always been there, buried under speed and stress. Now that life had slowed. It finally had space to surface. He began turning down opportunities he would have accepted without thinking before. Quick money. High pressure. Deals that sounded impressive, but felt empty. Each time he said no, it felt strange. Then it felt right. One afternoon, a longtime associate visited his office. They talked numbers, forecasts, future plans. Toward the end of the meeting, the associate leaned back and said, "You've changed." He didn't react right away. "How so?" "You're calmer," the associate said. "Not hungry like before." He thought about that. "I'm hungry," he replied. "Just not desperate." The associate laughed, unsure whether it was a joke. It wasn't. Later that week, he returned to the diner after a long day. He didn't bring paperwork with him anymore, just himself. The waitress greeted him with a nod. "Long day?" "Productive," he said, "which is different." She poured coffee and slid it toward him. "Different can be good." He watched the surface of the coffee ripple. "I used to think success was about moving fast and proving something. And now?" she asked. "Now I'm not sure who I was trying to impress." She smiled. "That's a dangerous thought." "Why?" "Because once you stop chasing approval, you can't unsee it." That lingered with him long after he left. Over the following weeks, small moments kept nudging him in the same direction. A conversation with an employee about burnout. A client thanking him for honesty instead of promises. A quiet evening spent at home instead of another late meeting. None of it looked impressive. All of it felt meaningful. One morning, while reviewing yearly goals, he crossed out half the list. Travel he didn't need. Expansions that added stress without purpose. Numbers meant to impress others more than help anyone. He stared at the shorter list that remained. It felt lighter. He didn't tell anyone about the change right away. He wanted to live it before he explained it. At the diner, he noticed something else too. Regulars came in with the same worries, the same tired looks. Some days, someone sat a little longer than usual. Some days, someone stared at paperwork the way he once had. He didn't interrupt. He waited one morning when the counter was quiet. The waitress said, "You're noticing people more?" He looked up. "Am I that obvious?" "You weren't before," she replied. He smiled. "Guess I had tunnel vision." "Most people do when they're running from something," she said. "And when they stop, they start seeing others." That idea followed him home. He began checking in with people differently. Less instruction, more listening. At first, it felt inefficient. Meetings took longer. Decisions slowed, but problems surfaced earlier. Solutions came. Cleaner, trust grew. The business felt more human. Months passed like this. Quiet shifts. Small changes stacking into something solid. Then one afternoon, an unexpected call came in. An old contact asked if he would speak at a small local gathering. Not about success. About failure? He laughed out loud at that. Me? He almost said no. Old habits whispered that vulnerability was weakness. Then he remembered the diner. The paper. The pause. He said yes. The room was small. Folding chairs. No stage. Just people sitting close together. When he spoke, he didn't prepare slides or stories meant to impress. He spoke plainly. About rushing. About pressure. About how close he came to losing everything by trying to end the discomfort instead of understanding it. The room was silent. Afterward, people stayed. They asked questions, shared their own stories. One person said, "I thought I was the only one who felt like that." He shook his head. Most of us do. We just don't say it out loud. Driving home that evening, something clicked. The diner hadn't just slowed him down. It had redirected. He didn't need to be louder. He needed to be clearer. The next time he sat in his usual booth, he told the waitress about the talk. She listened, hands resting on the counter. "Seems like you found a different kind of work," she said. "Yeah," he replied. "One that doesn't require pretending," she smiled. "That tends to last longer." He paid and stood, then paused. "You ever think about how one ordinary day can change everything?" She nodded. "Every day does. Most people just don't notice until later." Outside. The sky was pale and open. He didn't know exactly where the road led next, but he knew he would walk it. Differently, slower when needed, braver when it mattered, and always willing to pause before signing away something important that he realized was the real lesson, not just about business, about life.